Hey everybody, today's guest went to live with the Pitaha tribe in the Amazon for 30 years. He's the author of Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. What is it about this tribe that lives out in the Amazon jungle with no amenities that we would consider just common amongst our culture? But they don't have regular panic attacks. They don't have depression. They're measurably happier than we are. Find out what Daniel learned living among these people and what they have to teach us. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Next Level Healing. I'm your host, Dr. Tara Perry. I am thrilled today to bring to you a speaker, an author, a researcher, and a professor who will change your view of reality. Dan Everett was born in California and worked in the Amazon jungles of Brazil for over 30 years among more than a dozen different tribal groups. He's best known for his long-term work on the Pitaha language. He has published more than 100 articles as well as 13 books on linguistic theory, life in the Amazon, and the description of endangered Amazonian languages. His book, Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, Life and Language in the Amazonian Jungle, was selected by NPR as one of the best books of 2009 in the U.S., by Blackwell Bookstores as one of the best of 2009 in the UK, and was an editor's choice of the London Sunday Times. It was also a featured BBC Radio 4 Book of the Week. A documentary of his life and work, The Grammar of Happiness, was released worldwide in 2012. The Grammar of Happiness won first prize for the human sciences at the Jackson Hole Film Festival. It won the Young Europeans Jury Award at the FIPA Film Festival in Paris, France. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is a finalist for the, at the time it was a finalist for the Best Science Film of 2012 at the Paris Science Film Festival. There's also plays based on Everett's life, Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes, that have premiered in London. Another performance piece was done in Berlin in late spring of 2016. Daniel Everett is currently serving as a professor of cognitive sciences at Bentley University in Waltham, Massachusetts. I'm thrilled to have you with us here today. Thank you so much, Daniel Everett.
It's wonderful to be with you. Thank you for having me.
I love how you describe yourself as a happy failure. Can you let us know why that is?
Well, I went to Brazil originally to be a missionary and an evangelical missionary, so I wanted to convert a group of indigenous people to Christianity, and I failed in that, and the failure was based on a number of deep friendships with the people I was working with, and revelations that and new ways of thinking that they gave me. So I'm very happy for the failure, and in that case, I'm a happy failure as a missionary.
What was it that you were looking to bring to them, and at what point did you realize they had something special to offer you?
Well, I was in my training as an evangelical Christian, learning that the whole world is damned and going to hell unless they accept Jesus as their Savior. The idea was that people who don't know Jesus as their Savior are afraid of death and have a lot of needs that only He can fill. It usually works. In my case, I was a convert to Christianity because I was having a lot of problems in my life as a teenager, and so Christianity helped out with a lot of those things. But in any case, it became fairly clear to me early on that the Pitahas weren't afraid of anything. They weren't afraid of death. They didn't believe in the afterlife. They had really loving relationships. They didn't seem to be plagued with anxieties or nervous problems. They had never heard of suicide until I told them about it. They thought that was the funniest idea. They said, "What are you people like
I
to
love
kill
this
yourselves?"
story. You brought this story in as an example of why they should convert to your way of thinking. Can you tell us that story? Because it was very amusing.
Yes, I was sitting around telling them about how my stepmother committed suicide and how that affected my life. And when I got done telling this elaborate story, they all broke into laughter. And I'm thinking, I just told you one of the saddest experiences of my life and you're laughing. And so I asked them, why are you laughing? And they said, you people kill yourselves? That is the funniest thing we ever heard. Never heard of anybody killing themselves. And so they wanted to know details about it. They weren't making fun of me. They were just shocked that there's a society somewhere where people kill themselves. In fact, there are other societies that are indigenous to the Amazon. Some indigenous groups have problems with societies, but not with suicide, but not the Piraha.
And what's also wonderfully revealing, I mean, there's so many wonderfully revealing things in your book, but even the wording that they have for foreigner or foreign language is crooked head or bent head.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, I mean, and the other thing that I deeply love about your research and the work that you've done is that you open the doorway for what we benefit by learning from other cultures.
Hey guys, studies are showing that 68% of people that watch podcasts regularly don't click the subscribe button. Do me a huge favor. If you like this content, click subscribe so other people know where to go for the cool stuff. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most important lessons of my life is how we can learn from strangers. But yeah, I mean, when I first asked them, well, I was trying to learn to speak the language, obviously, and they would give me a phrase. Of course, I had no idea what it meant, but it would be apaicheso abaita, which I learned later meant literally a straight head is hard to find. And apai is head, and chi is straight, and abaita means is hard to find, actually it means it remains hidden. So they were just talking about the fact that I couldn't learn to speak their language, and I realized that they were using straight head as a way to refer to their language. So then I asked them, what do they call what Brazilians speak, or what I speak, English, when I'm not talking to them, when I'm talking to my kids and my wife, and they said, apagaiso, which means crooked head, and agai, which means crooked. You can be walking on a path, and if the path winds a lot, they can say the path is agai, the path is crooked, just like the heads of people who don't speak Piraha are crooked.
And if you were to ask them, why would you describe us as crooked-headed, what do you think they would say to you?
Well, I've asked them. I mean, their language and their way of life, as for us, is the norm, and they judge all deviation from that as basically inferior. So they're ethnocentric to a degree. They're pretty convinced that they have the best culture and the best language. And I find many Americans who visited with me, not scientists so much, but people who've come down, like a dentist who came with me one time to treat their teeth. He thought automatically that they would think white people were superior to them. And I said, when I explained to him that he was just somebody with a bent head who couldn't talk right, and this, he said, what, you mean they think they're superior to me? I said, do you think you're superior to them? I said, unfortunately, people often think they're superior to other people.
And in many ways, though, they have an amazing ability to, well, first of all, be happy.
Right.
I think somewhere along the line, and I think you probably noticed it quickly, and I believe you had a researcher come down and actually demonstrate ways of measuring that, and it was very simple. Just how often were they smiling and laughing, which was a preponderance of the time, was it not?
Right. This was a PhD student from MIT who's now a professor at Stanford. And he said, these must be the happiest people I've ever seen. I said, but how do you define happiness? How can you do that? And like the good psychologist who likes to have quantitative data, he said, we measure the amount of time they spend laughing and smiling, and I'm almost positive that's going to come out to be a lot more than at least in English. Of course, I don't know how much they smile around MIT and the PhD programs with all the pressure. Actually, they smile quite a bit. But they are also very accepting. Yeah, sure, they do feel that in some ways they're a little bit superior, but they also have a respect for diversity. They know that everybody's different, so they never condemn. You know, they might have a name, Crooked Head, but they will never say, English is ugly. Actually, I have to correct that because they did tell me English was ugly. But they never make fun of people or anything like that. They're just very accepting and very loving. And if you have a weakness or anybody in the group has a weakness, rather than exploit that, they all try to come to your aid and help you. And I know that if I were there and came under great in an emergency or really needed help, they would be the first ones to help me.
Can you describe for our audience what it was like for the first time going down there?
Yeah, I mean, I did missionary training, which included linguistics, and then some jungle training that was very useful, actually almost 5 months of jungle training. So when I first got to the village, I flew to Porto Velho, the city closest to it, where the missionary organization I was with had an airplane, and they flew me in. From Porto Velho to the village was about 2 hours and 45 minutes in a single-engine Cessna. And the previous missionary had built an airstrip there. I think it was about, I don't think it was as long as 900 meters, but it was maybe 700 meters long, enough for that Cessna to land, and, just 10 meters wide, 30 feet wide, and 2,000 feet long, something like that. But we flew off, we took off, we flew there. I get airsick every time I fly in a Cessna. I mean, rarely do I not get airsick. And so I was trying to hold it all together, sitting in the back seat, and the pilot from the front seat offered me a tuna and onion sandwich. And he had unwrapped it for me and held it back, and I tried not to vomit. Then I just said, I don't want, please get that away from me. And you can't hear well in those planes because the engine is so loud, so we're screaming at each other. And he finally took the sandwich away. And then we started losing out, going down to land, and he's circling, and all of that exacerbates my nausea. And then we landed. And so...
Well, he's circling in part to make sure that there's no junk on the airstrip because, as you described it, it was knee-deep or higher in grass. And
that's exactly right. Yeah, the airstrip was almost waist-high in grass. And when it's like that, you can't see very easily if there's like a big log in the airstrip or there's a hole somewhere.
Which is a huge problem with a Cessna when you're landing.
Yeah, it could be pretty quick death for everybody on board, and those things have happened, not with this missionary plane, but with other planes. The Pitahas, when they hear a plane, they know enough to make sure nothing's on the airstrip. You hope, it just depends on who's in the village. If the only ones in the village are teenagers, they're going to be about as responsible as teenagers anywhere, and they're not going to think about it. They're just going to be like watching the airplane. Adults will run out there and get stuff, but we have to look. You just don't know. And so we circled, and he thought it looked okay, and he said, okay, we're going in. But I'm already just closing my eyes and trying not to throw up. And so we hit and come in for our landing, and he turns around and comes back. And the temperature has gone, from probably 70 degrees up in the air and to almost 100 with 99% humidity down on the ground. And so you get out, you're nauseous, and you're hot and sweaty, and suddenly you're surrounded by all these people you've never seen before, speaking in a language that you've never tried to speak before. And so I didn't have time to get sick. They just all wanted to start talking to me. So I got out my pencil and paper, which I had in my pocket the whole way. And I started pointing at things and getting words and writing them down in a phonetic alphabet. and then speaking them back to them and entertaining them, because I could repeat back pretty much identical to what they had said, so they saw me sort of like a parrot, I think. So it was a very cute little parlor game for them. And then the plane left, and I'm there with one other missionary who had gone in with me. I wanted to go in first before I took the family in. And we stayed for 10 days, and that whole time, I just worked on learning the language.
And you
That's all I
basically,
worked on.
you didn't have a translator because nobody spoke this language. Is that correct?
One person, the previous missionary, did speak it, but he didn't come.
Okay.
So there was nobody there to use as a translator, and that's why he didn't come. He did not want me to rely on him, you know. So I've written articles.
Is a really unusual, exotic language that this was a huge endeavor that you took. I mean, they had, I believe, 8 consonants and 3 vowels, and so the men, I believe, spoke 10 different sounds, and the women spoke 10 different sounds, and the men 1 more sound, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So the women have 7 consonants and 3 vowels, most women. I see that's changing a little bit, where the men's dialect is becoming more widespread. But at the time, 7 consonants for the women, 3 vowels, 8 consonants for the men, 3 vowels. And so you can tell by the pronunciation, whether it's even on a tape recorder, you can tell, apart from the pitch, you can tell easily if it's a man or a woman speaking, because they're using those dialects, except that one gay man that I know in the village, he's married and has children because everybody has to get married, but he was pretty clearly gay, and he used the women's pronunciation.
And how did the other tribal people accept that? Are they, because it seems like they're very practical people, they just go with whatever is there in the moment.
Yeah, there's absolutely no stigma to any kind of, the only thing that you might call quote unquote sin, S-I-N, is losing your temper or becoming violent. Those things are not acceptable. Other things, or forcing people to do things against their will, that's also frowned on. But, your sex life is your business, not mine, and nobody cares.
Well, one could argue that very clearly follows the golden rule, and isn't that what all religions ultimately teach?
Yes, they do believe that in something that we could call the golden rule. I mean, because they believe you should treat others like you want yourself to be treated. And that's exactly how they do treat other people. They're very touchy-feely people, which I quite like. You'll be sitting talking to someone, and somebody else will walk up beside you, man, woman, child, and they'll put their arm or their hand on your shoulder or their hand on your head even, usually on your arm, your lower arm. And they'll just stand there with their hand on your arm, and it's just a sign of friendship and trust, because they wouldn't allow most people to touch them.
Isn't it crazy how absent our society is of touch, and how, just they've done studies on how many hugs you get a day and how good that is for your health. And
yeah.
So, how long did you live among these people before you sort of gained a different, because you went there to change them. Right. And then at what point did you go, oh, my goodness, they have valuable things to teach me?
Well, it took me a couple of months to be able to speak the language well enough to know anything about what's happening around me linguistically. But I had time to observe them and see their happiness and see how they treated one another and how they were laughing and telling jokes all the time. And kids could get away with anything. Nobody ever, spanking of a child is just unheard of. In fact, I as a Christian missionary,
I found this fascinating. The differences. Please, tell your stories about that, because you have a lot of your book devoted to this, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, as a Christian missionary who believed in spare the rod, spoil the child, I spanked my children, and when the Peterhof first saw me do that, they were not happy. And so I do tell them a story where I was going to spank my oldest daughter for something, and they all got around, and they just wouldn't allow me to come to do that. And she was smirking the whole time, which because she knew what was going on. And she spoke the language better than I did, and so she probably told them what was going on. And because she spent her whole day with the Pitaha kids. All my kids
children pick up the
their whole
languages.
day.
I went and lived in China for a year, and we had 2 young kids with us, and in a year they were laughing at our hideous language, our hideous accent.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's great. I mean, my children are one of the main reasons the Pitaha accepted me so warmly, because they thought that anybody who comes in with a family is a non-threat, just not a threat to them at all. And my kids were playing with their kids all day, every day.
I also love the perspective that when your children first got there, they thought these children were so ugly. And then a year later, some foreigners had come to visit you, and they were commenting on how ugly the children were, just because they're, by our standards, not kept. You know, they had perhaps bodily fluids in their hair, or dirty or dirty clothes or whatever. And a year later, when the foreigners that were visiting you commented on this, your children were like, well, how could you possibly think that? These are beautiful people. So what an amazing shift in perspective that is.
Yeah, it was, all of us changed in that way. You go from just seeing what is so different, and most of us tend to classify different as ugly or unacceptable in some way. And then as you get to know the people and get to know what's behind each one of them, we all saw them as this really handsome people. I mean, the men, for example, the average height of a man is probably 5'2", and the average weight's probably 155, and they might have 5% body fat. They are just lean, mean machines, all of them, and they have great endurance. And I was jogging regularly. I thought of myself as in excellent shape, but compared to them, I was just a puffball. I couldn't, I remember being way out in the jungle, carrying a big heavy load, and I was just exhausted. I was almost dehydrated. I couldn't. We'd walked miles carrying these loads of wood, and a Pitaha guy who weighed like probably 20 pounds less than me at the time comes up and taps me on the back, says, "You're not walking well. I'll take your thing." So he took both loads and walked all the way in, and he's this 155-pound guy, and he didn't get tired.
Tell us a quick story of them taking you hunting and how, what happened.
Well, I used to like to go hunting with them because I did all these activities with them, partially to help, partially to show friendship, but mainly to learn the words and learn the language. I was really interested in learning all this vocabulary from the jungle. So I asked if I could go hunting. They're always reluctant to take somebody hunting who doesn't know the first thing about hunting in the jungle, because for them it's food. They got to feed their family, and they don't want a lot of interference from some noisy guy. So, but they decided to take me hunting. I learned later that they weren't counting on this being like a very successful hunt. So they were going, and they were going to have fun, and we were going to. If we saw something, we would definitely get it. So we went out there, and they would like to play games, like have me go first, and I can't follow the path. And so I would get lost, and they thought that was incredibly amusing. And on the way back, they would have me try to lead, and I would always get lost, and they found this, again, amusing. And I had jungle training on how to follow paths in the jungle and that sort of thing, but it didn't help me at that time. Anyway, we walked out a ways, quite a ways actually, and they did sense that there was something up ahead of us because of the dogs, and so they said, "You stay here, and we'll be back." And I didn't have a weapon. I had nothing. I had no idea where I was. All the things that I would tell people to be sure that they're better prepared for. In any case, they just left me there, and they took off, and I couldn't hear them for probably over an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. It's been a long time. And And I'm just standing there. And as I like to tell people, if they hadn't come back to get me, my bones would still be there by that tree. But they did come back, no big deal, and they were carrying birds, curacao bird, and I think they had a couple of monkeys. They didn't have any big game, but they had, each person had enough for a pot of food. And then they wanted me to go in front, and so I gave them more amusement along the way. And then they're asking me which part of each animal I want, and I said, well, I didn't do anything for them, and you guys keep it all, which is the answer they actually wanted. So they were being polite, like, would you like to join us for dinner? And if you say yes, you might put them out, but they feel required to ask. But I knew well enough. The only time I ever took meat is from them, which was frequently, but we traded. Like I might give them a can of corned beef or a can of Spam, and they would give me a fish or some part of a monkey or something like that.
What did they think about our canned food?
Oh, they love it because it's got a lot of salt. They don't normally get much salt in their diet. I mean, they're very healthy, and, whatever you get from natural means. But they also love the fact that they can stick it up in their thatch roof, and one day they might take it down and eat it. But they don't usually store things. They usually just eat it as soon as they get it, and they just like it because it's different. They don't like all outside food, but they do like this.
You told a hilarious story when you first arrived that they were roasting a 50-pound, what looked like a 50-pound rat.
Yeah, right. That's right.
And this is after you had landed and were still quite a bit airsick. But they greeted you very graciously, and anyway, and then so this is what you saw them eating, which must have been very unappetizing, and then they watched you put together a bologna sandwich and thought you were eating bird poop.
Yeah, exactly. Mustard. I put mustard on my sandwich, and to them it looked like bird poop, and so they said, "Look, he's eating bird poop." And I said, "It's not bird poop, it's mustard. You want to try some?" And they did not want anything to do with that. They did smell it, though, so they could verify that it was something they hadn't experienced before.
So I love the title of your book, and I've turned a lot of people onto it. It's just such a beautiful, fascinating shift of perspective, which I think we all desperately need. But the title, "Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes." There are snakes. Tell us about that.
Yeah. At night, when they're getting ready to go to bed, they'll say something like, "Ai tabisahai chigaiche." Ai tabisahai mahuipai. And so ai tabisahai means don't sleep. Literally, it means sleep prohibition. There's a prohibitive suffix. So prohibited sleep, there are snakes. Or there are cats, meaning jaguars and that sort of cat. They invented this phrase for my first wife because she hated tarantulas. And so they would say, "Don't sleep, there are tarantulas." But it's a humorous phrase for them. They don't ever sleep that soundly, and it is true that there are lots and lots of snakes there. I've killed I don't know how many extremely poisonous snakes I've seen there over the years, and almost put my hand on one time. I'm fortunate to still be here in some ways. So that is one of their favorite phrases for going to sleep at night, and it's like don't let the bed bugs bite is the closest thing in American English that I can think about.
And they pride themselves on being very tough people, that they don't have to sleep a lot, or they might go a day without eating. If they go to the city, they put on 30 pounds within a week, and then they have to take that weight off when they get back out into the jungle. But I mean, that's part of the beauty that you conveyed about them, that they're a very dignified people that are used to living in extremely dangerous circumstances. As you mentioned the poisonous snakes, you also had this incredible story of being in a canoe or some type of boat and thinking there was a log that was drifting over towards you, and it ended up being
Right.
what was it, a 40-foot anaconda that was 3 feet wide?
Well, I didn't get to actually measure it, but here's how I know that it was very long, because when I realized it was an anaconda, it was swimming straight for us with its mouth open. I mean, and I noticed that its head was bigger than my head, and I swung my boat so it wouldn't T-bone us, and I swung my boat. It was an aluminum Sears fishing boat, a very small thing, and had a 15 horsepower Johnson motor on the back, and I swung and hit it with the prop, and then it disappeared. And I thought, well, that's good. But then it reappeared. It's what I thought was the entire length of its body. You see, like, I would say, I mean, it looked to me like 20 feet that I could see above me. Once again, I wasn't there with a tape measure or anything. And somebody, when they read this account, said that's impossible. Snakes can't stand up like that. So I know it happened because I saw it. But I wrote to a herpetologist at the University of Florida and explained this and asked, is that possible? And they said, yeah, but for the snake to stand up like that, its tail had to be on the bottom of the river. So if the river was 10 feet deep there, and it was at least 10 feet deep, then you have to add that to the length above the water to get the idea of how long that snake was. So we're talking about a snake that probably weighed 600-700 pounds, just a massive animal. I mean, they eat alligators.
Well, that was a very
Anacondas
lucky break to hit it in the head the way that you did, because your entire family was in the boat and it could have devoured any one of you.
Well, as soon as I saw that it raised out of the water like that, I realized that getting into my boat would have not been a problem. It would have been quite easy for it. And I had a machete in my hand, but it's kind of hard to do much damage with the machete unless you've got the head in front of you, and they're very good at hiding their heads when they come in, especially if the head's already grabbed a child or something.
I've held smaller snakes that wrapped around me, and they're pure muscle, so you were very lucky.
Yeah. I'm when you're going through these things, in my experience, I don't even think about the danger. I'm just thinking about, whoa, and then it's mainly muscle intelligence that's doing. But then when you get away and you realize you're safe with your family and you're out of the boat, that that wasn't too safe. That could have been quite negative. And then many times I've had to get out of my boat in that same river where you can't see an inch below the river. I just know that my boat ran on a sandbar, and I've got to push it off the sandbar. Well, there are stingrays there are alligators, there are anacondas, and you can't see any of that. So when you jump off the boat into the water to get yourself free for your family, I'm always tense.
Well, I find it interesting and a paradox that a culture like this can live in such an extremely dangerous environment. There's no question about that. And yet they don't have panic attacks. They're not on Lexapro. They're not, you did not experience, you didn't see depression. So can you talk a little bit about, the magic of living in the present moment, and what that does for your well-being, or how would you describe that?
Well, I would start by saying that the Pirahã are all self-sufficient. Everybody knows how to live in that environment. Everybody has developed incredible survival skills and bow and arrow skills and watchfulness skills and awareness skills. But they also, one of their cultural values is what's going on now. I mean, that's important to all of us, but many of us talk a lot about the past and think a lot about the past, and we get worked up about the past. We talk about our mamas and our daddas and how they could have treated us better and that sort of thing. Or we worry about the future. Am I going to get that job? Am I going to graduate on time? Am I going to, win this award or that award? But this is all foreign to the Pitahans' way of thinking. When I say that they don't talk about things in the past beyond their own experience, or even within their experience, that they choose not to talk about the past that much. Some people have misinterpreted that to mean that I'm saying they don't have a concept of the past. Well, of course they have a concept of the past. They know they got up yesterday, and that's different from getting up today. But they just don't talk about it. It's a value not to talk about it. And it's a value not to talk about the future. Those things are out of your control. They talk about the things that are in their control. In fact, there are two major suffixes that go on every Pitahan verb, and one of them, says that this is out of my control. And the other one, says this one is in my control. So if I'm eating right now, I will use the suffix with whatever. They take a bunch of suffixes. Their verbs are very complicated. Far, far more complicated than any European language or English. But they also, they don't worry about what they were. They also have a habit of changing their names. So every 6 months or so, somebody will have an event in their life and they'll start calling themselves by another name. So if you start to talk to them about something that they did in the past that made you upset, I try to avoid doing that kind of thing, but sometimes you might bring up a situation not realizing that for them it's embarrassing from the past that you witnessed. He might say, yeah, that wasn't me. That was so-and-so. So the changed name sort of frees you from some of the responsibilities that you had under that other name. So
that's brilliant.
Not only do they... Exactly.
It's brilliant.
So,
it gives you a chance to recognize what happened, but move on and actually become somebody else. Every transformation expert is teaching that in the United States.
Right. Well, it is interesting because they do believe in transformation and leaving the past behind. So in addition to not talking about the past as a cultural value, they have an additional way to free themselves from guilt, which is to be somebody else. And they know that in the future they can be somebody else. And it will be based on experiences that they had. So you don't find people saying, I wished I would have never done that. I have heard people say things like, talking about a dead Pitahan, a guy will come in and say, when I was in the field today, I thought of my friend so-and-so who's dead now, and I really missed him. So it's not like they're not capable of thinking about the past. These ideas sometimes come up in their heads without any prompting. You just reminded of somebody, maybe a smell or a sight or something you did together. But they choose not to dwell on that. I have a bad habit of always talking about my past, and I'm always telling my wife, she says, yeah, I've heard all these stories. But she never talks about her past. I have to pry it out of her. And she said, yeah, I don't live in the past. Why would I keep talking about the past? And in many ways, she also knows a lot more about nature than I do. So I often tell her she might be at home with the Pitahans living there, but...
So when you went there, what did you get that you expected you would get? And then what did you get that you totally did not expect?
Well, I expected to learn the language, and I did, because I had good training and I worked really hard. I hoped to be accepted by them and respected, and I was. I hoped to be able to respect them, and I did. And I hoped to convert them all, which I realized was never going to happen. It's completely against their culture. And if you ever hear about Pitahans that have been converted, it means they've already somehow lost their culture. They've already assimilated to, say, Brazilian culture.
And you were a string of several missionaries who had failed. So you were not the first to go down and try this.
No, the first one was from 1959. He worked there from 1959 to 1967. Then another missionary came in, and he learned the language a little bit, and he did some initial write-ups of the language, but he never made a single convert. He was replaced by another guy from 67 to 76. He learned to speak the language fluently, and he wrote some stuff up on the language and tried his hand at translation. But then when I was assigned, he said none of it was very good. Please don't pay attention to any of it. And so it wasn't until I had been out of the, gotten past my own analysis that I started looking at his, and it wasn't all that bad. But anyway, nobody had any success in converting anybody. And then we came in 1977, and I worked there parts of every single year, sometimes the entire year, sometimes half the year, sometimes a third of the year, from 1977 until 2009. And I spent probably a total of 8 years living in the village out of that 32-year period.
And what was the transition like for you when you realized, oh, what I thought was so valuable to offer them, they already have so much of value? That changed the relationships in your life, did it not?
Yeah, they had a couple of reasons not to accept the message of Christianity. One, it had nothing to offer their quality of life. They weren't afraid of things. They didn't, in most of their qualities, they beat Christian missionaries that I knew. They were less nervous, less worked up, more satisfied, more content, less fearful. They had all the positive characteristics, happier by far than most missionaries I knew. And so they had that. They also had the fact that, they didn't want an outside culture telling their culture how it should behave. They're very proud of their culture, and they're happy for me to talk about my religion, but don't expect them to follow it. Also, they didn't believe that I had enough evidence for what I was saying. They would ask me, when I had seen Jesus, and when I admitted that I had never seen him and I didn't know anybody who had ever seen him. They found that whole line of reasoning, that whole line of talk very suspect. So there was really nothing I had to convince them that Jesus was real or that they should put their faith in him. And as I saw all of this and started thinking about the reactions, I remember I started off as an atheist and then converted to Christianity. But I had been a Christian long enough and had enough Christian training and Bible training and theological training to know that there were a lot of things I myself couldn't come to grips with about organized religion. And I was an ordained minister and a graduate of the Moody Bible Institute, #1 in my class. And all of the foundations I had constructed and had seen, and all the beliefs I had, started to seem less and less significant compared to what I was experiencing among the Pitaha. They seemed to have answers that my society did not have, and they took such a matter-of-fact view of life with so little fear and so much enjoyment of day-to-day experience. Nobody told other people what to do. Nobody ordered anybody around. There was no chief. There was no boss. People just get up and do what you want. If you don't want to hunt, that's fine. You're not going to eat. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. If your kids are going hungry, they'll come over to some other fire and eat with those people. Nobody's going to deny a kid something to eat. So they were taking care of themselves. They had a self-confidence and a resilience and a happiness that I had seen nowhere else. And I began to realize that the evidence I thought I had for Christianity was no longer convincing to me. I don't make fun of or attack people who do believe. I have no doubts about my own views. But
did it change your relationship with your family at the time?
Yeah, it changed dramatically with my family. It led to a divorce with my wife. And one of my children has always talked to me, but two of my children stopped talking to me for 2 years. Fortunately, they had a change of heart, and our relationships are great right now. But it was a major cataclysm in my life. It just split the past from the future.
How did you go about explaining to them that your thoughts had changed? That must have been very difficult for you.
Well, it was very hard, and I don't know that I've ever succeeded. I have adult grandchildren now, married grandchildren, and they're very tolerant and loving of me. But sometimes they do ask me for more explanation. My son is now a happy atheist, like I am, so this doesn't bother him anymore at all. But he didn't talk to me for 2 years. My two daughters, they've heard me say it a million times, so they don't ask me anymore. We're just friendly together, and when they come to visit me, we ask them to say grace at the table, and I told them, I said I was an evangelist for Jesus, but I'm not an evangelist for atheism.
So would you describe the Pitaha as atheist? Because at one point early in the book, you described this amazing scene where they're reacting to what they believe is a spirit on a beach not far away, which they apparently can see clearly, and neither you nor anybody in your family could see it. Can you talk a little bit about their relationship to spirits in the forest?
Right. So they don't believe in God. They don't have any concept of a God who controls the universe or anything,
or even
like
that the universe was created. Right? They don't have a concept of that.
They have no creation myth, no creation story. They don't believe in that kind of thing. However, they do believe in these kinds of entities in the jungle. And because I was a missionary, the only word I had for that was spirit. And everybody had said they believe in evil spirits. But as I've come to think about this more, I believe that they have a belief in entities that are somewhat like humans, but not human, and somewhat like animals, but not animal. So they have blood entities. They call us blood ones, and they have non-blood ones. And this thing that was across the river was a non-blood one. And they were all standing there screaming, jumping up and down, pointing. And I said, "What are you pointing at?" And he said, "You can't see it?" And he gave me its name, Igagai, on the other side of the river on the beach. And I didn't see it. And I said, "I'm not seeing anything." He said, "Well, it left now." And this is not uncommon among them. I have no explanation for that. It could have been something they saw that they associated with a spirit that I wasn't noticing. That's not their explanation of what happened. Their explanation is that they saw a spirit that looks like a human being. But spirit is the wrong word again. I just fall into that thing from that Christian background. It is an entity, and we don't know. It's also difficult to distinguish for all of us where fact ends and fiction begins. This is something we struggle with in our politics and religion and all sorts of things. And so somebody said, "Well, that's just a fiction for them." Well, I don't know that it is. I think it's a fact. None of that was faked that I was seeing. I don't have an explanation for it, but that doesn't make them believers in the supernatural. The fact that they believe there are entities that don't have an explanation. I mean, biology is full of entities that somebody described once that doesn't have an explanation because we haven't had a chance to carefully study it. So I prefer to think of it as there are certain things they see they can't explain, and they call them by these entities. It's their way of bringing them into the classification system and into the culture. But they don't believe that these things are magical or that they can do miracles or anything like that.
How long has it been since you've lived with them, Daniel?
Since 2009.
Do you miss them?
Yeah, I miss them a lot. I actually have a project in the works with a very famous portrait photographer, Martin Schuller, who has been with me to the Pitaha And actually, he took the pictures that are in Don't Sleep, There Are Snakes. And so he's been with me to the Pitaha twice. And we're thinking of doing a large coffee table book on the Pitahas that will have his photos and my text explaining the cultural scene that we're seeing. And so we're trying to raise money for that now. And if we get it, then hopefully by the end of this year or early in 2025, we'll be there doing these photos. And we'll stay there for several weeks.
And how are they currently doing as a culture? Because I know you took steps to ensure that their land wouldn't be taken away from them. How are they currently doing as a culture?
Their land is protected, the land that I helped identify for them. The Brazilian government was very proactive with COVID, and it made, at least with indigenous peoples. And it, as soon as it heard about COVID coming, it sent representatives to get all the Pitaha to go farther down the river, farther away from any outside contact. And as far as I know, no Pitaha got COVID. And as far as I know, nobody was vaccinated against COVID. They were just isolated and kept away from it. So they seem to be doing very well. When I went to the Pitaha for the first time in 1977, we estimated that there were 145 people total, the whole language.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, that's much bigger than some other Amazonian groups that were down to 8
Oh, my goodness.
people. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, they're very endangered groups. But the Pitaha now, I haven't done this count myself, but according to the Brazilian government, is around 750 to 850 people now. That's the total population that speaks that language. But it is encouraging to see that they're growing, and this growth continues. Very slowly, but it continues.
I am immensely grateful that you've joined us today. I could continue talking to you for another couple of hours. I would love to ask you one more question. If you were to go back in time and talk to yourself as a 10-year-old, what advice would you give?
Well, interestingly, I wanted to be a missionary first when I was 10 years old. And that's when somebody gave me a book on missionaries, about missionaries in the Amazon. And I would have told myself, these stories sound much less romantic when you're actually going through them. And I remember thinking that book I read when I was 10 years old, when my wife was dying and my daughter was dying, and we were lost on a tributary of the Amazon trying to find our way out. And I thought, you really like those missionary stories, and now you're having one.
Yeah, you went through some harrowing experiences trying to save your wife and family from dying of malaria, which you had thought was something else, and were treating it as if it was something else until they informed you of what it was. I love the candor that you write your book with, the humility that you write your book with, and I love the message that you certainly conveyed in one of your TED Talks, that the value of going and living with people who are different than you are.
Yeah, that to me, wisdom from strangers, seeking out diversity, these are extremely important principles. We learn a lot more quickly from people who are unlike us than we learn from people who are like us, at least about life and culture and appreciation of the world that we live in. So I'm very grateful for every single hour I have lived among Amazonian peoples and the Brazilians that I'd lived with for so many years. And I'm grateful for the Mexicans and Mexican Americans that were part of my life growing up on this California-Mexico border. Diversity has given me a much better life.
If you were to sum everything up in your life experience, what do you most want people to know?
That we're often over our head in the challenges that we've accepted. But it's like we're walking underwater, but we have to keep walking because you will reach the bank and get out. And I've learned that sticking with it there's no secret to that, and that's the only way. That's the only way forward. It's the only way to make progress in your life, is to stick with it. And I believe that comes in large part through the Pitahas.
Beautiful. And the documentary on your life and work, The Grammar of Happiness, you said that there's potentially a link on your website. Can you give us your website information and how else you would like people to stay in touch with you?
Well, there's a contact. You can contact me through my website, which is daneverettbooks, all one, .com.
Beautiful.
daneverettbooks.com. And if you go to media on that page, you'll find films, and The Grammar of Happiness is on the media page on Dan Everett Books.
Fantastic. So grateful to have you.
Actually, there's a video accessible to my webpage, a very short 15-minute talk where they did an MRI of me listening to Peter Ha, where they can actually, the neuroscientist believes that's proof that I'm fluent in the language, and you can see my brain on Peter Ha.
Well,
So
it's no small accomplishment what you pulled off. I know you had the grammarian for My Fair Lady come down to visit you to prove you wrong, and was actually, you proved him wrong. There were a lot of things about Pitaha grammar and language that didn't seem possible, and yet you proved it to be correct. So again, just so grateful to have you here today. Folks, if you enjoyed this, please click like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next episode of Next Level Healing.